Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're demystifying some pretty complex Philippine labor law doctrines by looking at a routine air conditioning installation that, believe it or not, spiraled all the way up to the Supreme Court. It's an absolutely fascinating look at how everyday workplace misunderstandings can snowball into massive legal precedents.
So, let's dive right in. We're starting with a remarkably simple question. Can a tiny, unrequested drain pipe and a mere 300 peso tip actually cost you your livelihood? I know, it sounds completely absurd on the surface, but as we unpack the facts of this case, you'll see exactly how these tiny, seemingly insignificant details triggered some massive legal consequences.
To untangle this whole workplace mess, we're going to quickly walk through the inciting aircon incident and then break down the 4 specific legal doctrines the Supreme Court used to resolve it: just cause, work abandonment, the Agabon doctrine, and field personnel. Finally, we'll look at the ultimate verdict.
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, the aircon incident, where an everyday job goes totally wrong.
Picture this. It's July 2007. Marshall Dimaya, a team leader for Virex Enterprises, heads out for a standard AC installation. But things derail fast. On day 1, his team uses a drain pipe that wasn't on their request form, and they accept a 300 peso tip from the client without declaring it. By day 2, the company's storekeeper realizes materials are missing, which sparks a whole investigation. Come day 3, per company policy, Dimaya's team is slapped with a fine for double the cost of the missing items. It's about 764 pesos each. But Dimaya stubbornly refuses to pay, insisting the tip was just given in good faith. By day 4, after a massively heated argument with management, Dimaya simply stops showing up to work.
And this right here perfectly illustrates the core conflict of our case. We have 2 completely different narratives. The employer, Virex Enterprises, is claiming Dimaya abandoned his job out of a stricken conscience and an affected ego over the fine. But Dimaya, he's basically saying, no way, I didn't abandon anything. He fired me and told me to get out.
To back up his side of the story, Dimaya actually quoted his boss, Mr. Bernardo, during their final confrontation. Dimaya came to his boss, screamed a phrase at him that translates to, "Don't show your face to me, my blood is boiling at you." For Dimaya, that furious outburst was a clear, unmistakable verbal termination.
Which brings us to Section 2, Doctrine Number 1, just cause. Was this dismissal actually legal?
Now, in labor law, you can't just fire someone because you're angry, right? You need a legally valid reason. 2 of those reasons are serious misconduct and willful disobedience. The court pointed out that sure, failing to account for a piece of plastic pipe might just be a simple mistake on its own, but obstinately refusing to pay a valid, documented company fine and shifting the blame to your junior coworkers, that definitely crosses a major legal line.
The real kicker here is this concept of wrongful intent. Think about it. If Dimaya had just swallowed his pride and paid the 764 peso penalty, exactly like his 2 coworkers did, he would have kept his job. The initial error itself wasn't what got him fired. It was his blatant defiance and unjustified refusal to follow company policy that gave the employer a perfectly valid just cause to terminate him.
Let's move to Section 3. Doctrine number 2, work abandonment. Who actually has the burden of proof?
So, the employer definitely had a valid reason to fire Dimaya, but remember, the employer's official defense was that they didn't fire him. They claimed he just abandoned his post. Well, under Philippine labor doctrine, abandonment is incredibly hard to prove. It requires 2 specific things. First, failing to report to work without a good reason, and second, a clear, deliberate intention to sever the employment relationship forever. And guess what? The burden of proving both of those rests entirely on the employer's shoulders.
Here is where the company really dropped the ball. Virex Enterprises couldn't provide a single shred of evidence to prove Dimaya actually intended to quit forever. Standard HR practice is to send a return-to-work notice to an absentee employee. Because the employer skipped sending this totally basic letter, the Supreme Court ruled they completely failed to prove abandonment, which, of course, made Dimaya's claim that he was fired on the spot in a fit of rage look a whole lot more credible.
All right, Section 4, Doctrine number 3. The Agabon doctrine and the very steep price of ignoring due process.
Let's connect the dots here. The employer had a legally valid reason to fire Dimaya because of his insubordination. But because they fired him verbally while seeing red, they entirely skipped procedural due process, known as the twin notice rule. It's kind of like sports. The employer had a totally valid reason to call a foul, but they immediately handed out a red card, the dismissal, without showing the required yellow cards first. And those yellow cards are a written notice to explain, an actual hearing, and a final written notice of termination.
Enter the Agabon doctrine. This is a game changer.
The doctrine states that when you fire someone for a totally valid reason, but you skip that required procedural due process, the dismissal remains valid. You don't have to hire them back. However, to penalize the employer for ignoring the employee's rights, the company must pay exactly 30,000 pesos in nominal damages. It is a strict, undeniable financial penalty for taking procedural shortcuts.
Next up, Section 5, Doctrine Number 4, Field Personnel. Let's talk about who gets holiday pay.
So, the company tried to argue Dimaya wasn't entitled to holiday or service incentive leave pay because he was classified as field personnel, meaning he worked outside the office. But the legal test for this has two prongs. Yes, for sure, he installed AC units away from the office, but the second prong requires that the actual hours of work in the field cannot be determined with reasonable certainty. The employer totally failed to prove they couldn't track his hours. Therefore, legally speaking, he was not field personnel and he was absolutely entitled to those unpaid benefits.
Which finally brings us to Section 6, the final verdict. Let's see how the Supreme Court ruled on the whole shebang.
This verdict is just a brilliant, balanced application of the law. Dimaya claimed a legal dismissal and wanted back wages, but the court denied that. He permanently lost his job and his back wages due to his own willful disobedience. But Virex Enterprises didn't walk away clean either. Because they acted out of pure anger and completely ignored the twin notice rule, they were ordered to pay that 30,000 peso agabon penalty, plus the holiday and service incentive pay they wrongfully withheld. Both sides messed up, and both sides faced the consequences for their specific failures.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, this case gives us a fascinating, real-world takeaway about the strict boundaries of authority. It literally doesn't matter how right you think you are in a dispute, the law demands a proper process. I want to leave you with this to think about. In your own workplace, when conflicts inevitably arise, is your management carefully adhering to procedural due process, or are they just winging it and risking a 30,000 peso penalty? Keep that in the back of your mind next time tensions rise at the office. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into the anatomy of a legal battle.